Welcome to Lay Back with Betfair. I'm Tom Haylock. This is a professional punter interview with Terry Leighton as I welcome in the great man. How are you, mate?
Very good, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Now, we'll touch on plenty of things in the next half an hour or so. We'll talk about your life in wagering, what you do, some strategies, bank strategies, whatever, but some stories I think we've got coming up as well. It's all happening. Talk to us first about, just briefly, a bit about your background, how you got into the great game.
Very simplistic one for me. Never really had any sort of links to the industry. My old man was a passionate racing man. I think one of his favourite stories on the punt is the fact that he was on the front page of the paper yelling at I think it was a Tommy Smith horse, and it says, irate punter upset with ride, or something along those lines. I actually tried to find the clipping for you, but it's hidden away somewhere. It would have been very good content. So I'm now the irate punter.
You're following the father's footsteps in that?
Very much so, yeah. Very much so, yeah. Very, very much so. But so never had any real links beside my old man, who was massively into the game. I caught the bug, as a lot of people do, very early on, and probably did it for a few years, and I'm probably a little bit more, got to a point where I thought, am I actually any good? Like, I won't enjoy doing this every Saturday Arvo if I don't think I'm actually going to make money.
Did your old man do it with any sort of success, or was he just
he never recorded, he was recreational, but he was pretty good.
Yeah, right.
He was pretty good. I reckon over the last 15 years of his life, he would have showed a profit. But yeah, he also didn't mind a frothy and having a go at the Vale thoroughbreds after one at the local as well. So he probably gave away a few of them there, which we have to try and be better at. But he was a great inspiration for the game. But I sort of got to a point where I wanted to either tell myself I was making some money, and I thought by recording I would show that I probably wouldn't make any money. I thought that was what it was going to probably indicate. And we showed a bit of success. I recorded my data for 6 years and eventually decided that's it, pulled the pin. I was working for a part of Corrective Services pulled the pin, and here we are 6-7 years later.
So what were you doing back then? All videos, just manual form, that kind of
just
stuff?
Manual form, yeah. I've never had, I didn't have any sort of data whatsoever. I saw the last 600 metre times on the Chris website, which is the website we're using WA to do a lot of our form, it was just manual stuff. I wrote myself an email. I still write myself an email to this day. I reckon I'm the most unsophisticated professional punter there is.
It's good intel.
But that's probably my edge, though, to be honest with you, to some degree.
We'll touch on all of that in a minute. That's a fascinating story. So a lot of people wonder, there's so many people around Australia and if not the world that do similar to what you were doing that period of time. They work full time and just enjoy a punt and do a bit of form. How hard was it for you to do that and realise you found an edge, or you were good at it, and to go from that into what you are today?
It was, that part of it wasn't all that difficult, to be honest. Once I realised that it was there, and I'd recorded for a long time, 6 years of data pre-quitting work. It was a really long time. And it was probably a push of mine from a mate who's a sports punter over in WA that probably got me to finally do it. But we hit the road, and I decided to, probably the biggest lesson I learnt early doors once I did take the plunge was I decided to travel around Australia for the first sort of 6 months, a year of my professional punting life, and just enjoy the life and enjoy the road and see parts of Australia. And the first couple of months we flew. We had a great couple of months on the punt, but we were out having a few beers, and obviously we're driving every day, and I'm not doing the work. I'm not doing the form, and I really started to struggle because I wasn't doing the work. And it was probably a costly lesson, but it was the greatest lesson that I've had on the punt, is that my biggest strength is the amount of time I put into it and the amount of man hours.
We'll talk about your edge as well coming up, but recording results. So that's not an easy thing for people to do, the recreational punters. And obviously there would have been stages at that point in time where you doubted you were making profit, and you've decided, and it's taken you 6 years. Why did it take you so long to pull the pin?
I had a government job. I thought that was just a nice cruisy to go. And to be honest with you, and hopefully nobody from Corrective Services listening, if they are, I do apologise in advance, but I could do a fair bit of form at work, to be honest with you.
They can't sack you now, mate, don't worry.
I was multi-task. I think they know that because half the office followed me in on most of the good ones. They all came crowded around my desk. That's why you kept the job. Exactly right. But so that was probably it. In retrospect, I should have pulled the pin earlier, but it's the best thing I ever did.
So you're on the road. Your work rate probably dropped off a little bit and you learn a costly lesson. Was there one race, I think you've got an example for us, one race or one example that led you to believe you were good at this and you could do this full time?
Yeah, well, it's actually not the one we'll talk about, but believing I could do it. I actually remember a race on Boxing Day, and I came up with a horse at 30, 40 to 1. It was called Touch the Net, and it won that particular day. I always remember that horse winning as the one going, geez, I don't think anybody else found that or even considered it. And you think it's a moral, and I think a lot of them are morals and a lot of them run last. But that one I vividly remember. But the race you're talking about is the one. So I was on the road travelling. Is this you want me to?
Yeah, let's go to this.
Rock and roll this one.
You want to talk about this,
I
mate.
definitely want to talk about this one. 100%.
We had Shane Shirley on earlier. It was all head wobble. Now it's your turn. Sean.
Yeah, he's one of those little dolls you put on the dash, and they've made those of him, I reckon. Anyway, we're going to talk you through this one.
Yeah, run us through it. I can't wait to hear this story.
All right. So anyway, well, I'll start before we start the replay. Actually, I'll tell the story leading into it.
Yes, tell us.
So the horse's name is Queen Tory. It's in Albany. It's about 2016, I would say. And I had a reasonable results on her when she won her maiden. It was over 1,200. She sat deep, did a lot of work. In running, got up about 15 to 1. That was a reasonable result. Yes. Not too bad.
Is this why you were full time at this stage?
Yes. Yeah, very early doors. Yep. Very early doors, full time. So it was a nice one to get. Sort of when you don't have the security of that income coming in as well. The trainer whipped it up to went straight from 1,200 up to a mile, 1,500, 1,700. It was beaten out of sight 3 starts in a row. I thought, what are you doing? Just get it back to the sprint journey. I think it's actually a pretty good horse, and it'll go through the grades. And he got it back to the sprint journey. And I thought, well, everyone's going to say this isn't hard to miss. And it's gone up about 80 to 1. So I've contacted anyone I could. Get me on. Did you
do rated prices then or anything like that?
Yeah, I did. I had it. Sometimes you're going to be on, as well. Sometimes you're going to be on, but it was single figures. I can't remember exactly what I had it, but it was a high single figures. And it went around, and the jockey that day was Mark Forder. This isn't this race, actually. And it was the race before, and he was held up the entirety of the straight. Right. And it was an absolute moral beating. And I just thought, you are kidding. You are kidding me. That was my big sting. Yeah, very big bet that day.
Right.
A couple of weeks later, goes around again, nominated again, drew wide, drew the car park in a race with speed. It probably made less sense, but I was like, well, its best runs were tracking into races from the wide draw. Anyway, it's gone up 80 to 1 again. And I thought, oh, dearie me. So I've contacted the same people. I said, come on, no good last time. I said, no, this is it. This is our time. So I've managed to get a reasonable whack on 80s and about $20 a hole. Jump on Betfair for the last 5 minutes to finish me bet, and it's trading. I was trading 200 to 1 for a bit there. I think the Betfair SP price was $192, roughly, give and take. I feel like I'm turning into Shane Shirley now, don't I? And as they say, the rest is history.
Well, let's get the race up. I want you to talk us through this. So, Where are we here?
Okay, we're in the breeze now. I think what's important to note is that it took about 300 metres for young Casey Hunter at the time to work around the field and get to the breeze. Right. So there was no right to still be there. And we'll have a look at it.
Get it up. So in what colours are we looking at here?
The red blinkers, the white silks, challenge. That's one Jason Whiting on the outside, a Peter Weston horse.
Yes.
But she responded extremely well, and it was about this point at the 100-metre mark where I realised we were home and the shirt went off, and I was in a pub in South Melbourne, and I started running down the street in South Melbourne and letting everybody know how good I was, which is a common occurrence for me, to be honest with you. And we've come back into the pub. I've come back into the pub. My mate's chasing me
How long after the race did you?
3 hours. No,
that's it.
About a minute too later, and they said, "Oh, we're going to have to actually ask you to leave." And my mate said, "Oh, no, he's just had a really good winner." And he's like, "Well, maybe you're going to have to shout at the pub or something." I said, "Okay, no worries." It's about 10 people. It's just a little tiny pub. Then they opened up the other door and the full bar on the other side and that side too, and I said, I can shout half of Melbourne right now if you want to. So off we went, and it was wobbling. So and that was good. We were pretty happy with that. And
is that the biggest winner you had to date?
Price wise, it is. There was a horse called Black for Me, which was beaten in a photo. That was nearly 400 to 1 in an 8-horse field. But that didn't win, so that's no good. But yes, I think it's the longest price winner, but I'm not sure. Yeah, that's one thing I found these days. There's less wild outlier prices that you find. There's too many Sharpies in Western Australia now than there was in the past, and that would have been found by others and probably started 20 to 1 these days.
We'll definitely get to that because the game has changed. We touched on it with Shane as well a little bit about how much has changed over the time. I mean, we've got all sorts of challenges now getting on, how sharp the market is, all sorts of things, and much more, or many more people doing the same thing, Terry. So I think that's a challenge, but we'll touch on that in a minute. You've gone from $192 Betfair winner. I think the SP on the corporates was about the $60. So again, it highlights the value of these roughies on Betfair. Huge 100%. Overlays, massive prices. You were dying to get on at the 80s, where you could have had it all on it. The
exactly
180
right.
SP. But anyway, so you've gone from a massive high. You've just backed a $190 winner, and you're alive in the quaddie.
Yeah.
This is was it second last leg this race?
Yes. Yep. We got the first two legs at about $7 and $5. They weren't like they were $1.90 pops.
No. Into
so
a $100 shot.
Yep,
so
into $100
You probably got the pool.
I think we had the pool we had the three favourites and a roughie. And I know the roughie definitely was paying more. So I'm not sure if it was, so it couldn't have been the pool, I don't think, in that sense. But anyway, and the three favourites were out the back. And the roughie, its name was Sensory Rule. I think you got a picture of it there, don't you? And
we'll get it up.
Watching on one of those old school projectors. in a pub, and I did the old walk up to the TV when I saw Molly Clark coming down the outside, and I did the lean as you do, and unfortunately we were nutted by a lip. So we enjoyed that night. We had a few celebratories.
At that photo, like that is sick. And if you watch the replay, it's come from the clouds.
Came from the clouds, was deep the trip. Not much went right.
Do you remember what the quaddie was paying?
Plenty. Plenty. And
more than the result from the previous race?
4 times. Three times as much it was. I remember that. So we were very happy to have the result.
You're still in the pub at this point in time, because they would have kicked you out for sure.
100%. Yeah, they would have. Yeah, we might have bought the thing, actually.
What were you doing in Melbourne?
I was driving around Australia, so I quit the job.
Oh, that was that
was that. So I decided just to see a bit of Australia while I had the freedom of not having the full-time job, and I learnt very quickly that wasn't a good decision, basically, if I wanted to be serious and I wanted to continue to make money and do what I do, because I just couldn't dedicate the time that I needed to.
Would have been a fun time of your life, but obviously the mental challenges all probably new at that point in time as well, right in the highs and the lows and whatnot. We'll talk about that as well. But let's go back a step to what your edge is. What are you doing now? How are you successful in what you do?
Okay. I think my biggest edge comparative to most punters is I think most people use data models. They use their the weights ratings systems pretty heavily. That's never been my go. I had a tough little period probably 18 months ago, and that was when I tried to incorporate the data. I tried to use something that wasn't my strength and incorporate it into my game and make it my strength, and I got lazy and just started looking at the numbers as the answers.
Yes.
And that wasn't my go. I know some really good punters who use the figures and they use them really well, but that's not my edge, and that's completely not my edge. So it's basically just time spent. I think the biggest strength of mine is probably knowing the horse's characteristics, and also knowing the sort of the stable's characteristics as well. Like if they lob blinkers on in a trial, then you know they don't think the horse is going that well, or just little bits and pieces in that nature. But I create my own markets by hand. I mark them just under 100%. I give myself sort of a confidence feel, what I feel about the race, what I feel about the particular market.
Is that just mentally, or you write that down, the confidence
factor?
Yeah, I
do. Yeah, confidence low, medium, high.
Yeah, right.
And then I go, I wasn't that confident in my market. It's barely over my price. I might let it go. Or I might just have a smaller bet. Staking wise, that's important as well, because it sort of allows me to know how much I'm going to bet in that sense. I'm probably a lot less, and I said it to you off air before, I'm a lot less sophisticated than most punters, but I also think that's an edge of mine as well, is sort of working sort of a little bit outside of the box and a bit more openly in that sense.
So I think you've learnt through that period 2 years ago, the clarity and knowing your edge is crucial to anyone out there. Is that a big piece of advice you give to people?
Massive, yeah. I think it's huge to not try. Definitely not power. Knowledge is power, and you want to learn from people as much as you can. And I'm always learning from various people in the industry, but find what works for you and find your edge. If your edge is finding shorties and sharpies, that's fine. If your edge is certain tracks, if your edge is using the data and making the numbers work for you and just having one bet a week or whatnot. So I'm someone that bets nearly in every single race, and that works for me. So yeah, finding what works for you, and there's no exact rule for every individual. It's different.
Yep. You mentioned you frame markets to under 100%.
Yep, about 98%.
Talk to us about that and why you frame it to 98%. Obviously, the Betfair markets, because it's a peer-to-peer exchange, the Betfair markets are usually about 102%. Yep. It gets close, it gets right down. But why 98%? A lot of people, you hear different professionals market to 110, some to 90, some to 100, whatever it may be. Why the 98?
I just allows me to bet more. If I market too low, there's probably going to be less overlays. So I back myself in to get closer to 100%. If it's one of those races, excuse me, that I'm not massive on confidence-wise, I will lower that percentage a little bit, which means if I am getting...
It's harder to find
yeah, exactly right. There's a little bit more in it for me. So it's to enable me to increase my turnover, and the way the game's changing, and it's something that I'm sort of going through at the moment is sort of the days of using your corporates and getting people to get you on. It's becoming very difficult and becoming hard. You're betting more, your bank's increasing, hopefully. So a lot of the wagering is moving to Betfair, and what I'm trying to do is, like, I'm not going to go at the 20-odd% that I did once upon a time when, you know, you've got mates who can get you on the early 365 prices and all those lovely things that occur. But I'm going to try and increase turnover and go at a lower percentage, but I'm okay with that. And that's sort of the way my sort of business is moving at the moment. And
that's a fascinating point, because the landscape continually changes, and whether it be your edge changes or getting set, how you bet and your methodology around that continually changes. And I assume that's changed dramatically in your 5 or 6 years. Yeah, it has. It's been probably the biggest challenge of the lot. I mean, you run out of people you can ask to try and get you on, and it's not a business model that it's easy to work as well. I don't like doing that. I don't like being a pest. I don't like annoying people. So I am trying to sort of just do it autonomously, trying to do it by myself. Minimum bet laws helping?
They are, they are a little bit. The problem is the few Western Australian racing at the moment, and this is something from the last few months, we have some pretty sharp operators, but everybody that is a reasonable operator has a marked account, and the prices are getting walloped. Like, so if you want to get to MBLs, which is 9 o'clock the next morning in WA, the good ones aren't lasting, you know, they just aren't. The ones that are still there at 9 in the morning, you're probably going to get the same price, if not a better price on Betfair. So it's helping at times. It's good in the country, because I really struggle to get on in the country and the deeper country. But there's just so many marked accounts that are knocking prices horribly in WA at the moment.
And even if you can get set for a little bit, I mean, as soon as they get those accounts having a bet, they just wind the prices in. You notice you talked about actually turning over a little bit more, but actually reducing your profit on turnover, but you're still making the same amount of money using Betfair a bit more.
Yep.
Is that a massive challenge for you? Change, obviously, how are you finding Betfair at the moment, and what kind of stuff are you doing, and how do you find the markets comparatively to early fixed betting to corporates and then Betfair?
Well, I think the biggest thing, the biggest challenge, and it's always going to be the hardest thing for me, not just me, but any punter, is the early prices might suggest one bet, but you couldn't get that price. The race comes around, that horse gets walloped, and it's just a completely unbackable price. But then what happens is another horse should be the bet. But it's about swallowing that initial thought process and swallowing what you see. And what you probably have that horse on top. You've marked at 240, it jumps 210, but the horse you've got $5 or $6 suddenly jumps $11. That becomes the bet, whether it be place heavy, win, whatever. The aim is not just to win on that particular race, it's to win long term. So if we place that bet if I back the $2 10 pot, which I think is more likely to win, obviously, if I'm marking at 240 long term, I'm going to lose overall. But if I back the $11 pot, which I think is less likely to win that particular horse race, I'll win long term. That's the theory. So that's still the hardest part for me, because you go into a race and I'm like, oh, this will get me. Like, if I can get 280, I'll be tickled pink here, and it jumps 220, and you go, geez, I'm going to have to not only not back it, but I'm going to have to back against it. And a lot of the time you watch it win and you lose on that particular race, but you have to do that.
In that instance, are you doing much lay betting on Betfair?
No, I'm not a layer. I'm too opinionated with my stuff. If I get something wrong, I can get it wrong.
Yeah,
that's the thing. So I reckon if I laid too much, I reckon I would show a loss on laying. I think I occasionally will lay place markets at around the $10, $20 mark if I think there's a risk on the horse, and I'm getting sort of $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 my money. But yeah, very little in the laying sense. But yeah, I think for those that can pick out a horse The ones that I'd want to lay would be the ones that early markets have short, but they end up jumping that price. I think there was one at Belmont yesterday that went up $4, and I thought this is a $30 chance, and it jumped $22 on Betfair. So I'm not going to lay it.
It's drifted all the way out.
Yeah, so I'm not going to lay it at 22. But if it was $4 and even money a hole or $1.80 a hole, I'd probably consider it. But never been my go so much the lay betting.
And that's important to know, because people know their strengths, what they're good at. It takes people time to develop their strengths and try different methods. You probably tried lay betting a certain period of time. You might have tried certain things like hedging, or you've taken short odds. You might be hedging. But talk to us about the dynamic around tipping compared to your professional staking, because you mentioned you might tip horses at $3 and they start $2 and they're no longer bets. That must be a complete challenge mentally, and play with how you're wagering a little bit as well. Yeah,
it does. I'm still, that's still one of my major weaknesses, I'd say, actually. You tip one and you feel an obligation to some degree. Like, I really do like to keep the tipping to a minimum, and I'm very happy to tip on my Saturdays in the Metro meeting and talk about that. And I love all the little bits and pieces I do in regards to that. But I really do like your Wednesdays, Thursdays, Sundays, Fridays when there's racing, and you're sort of just doing it by yourself, and there's a little bit more freedom. So one thing that I need to probably do better, and a great example is a horse last Saturday or the Saturday before. It's called Alkaline. I thought I was going to get a better price late. It was about $8, $9 at the time. It's jumped $4. I've marked at $6.30. I openly said I marked at $6.30. The thing I marked a $4.80 favourite was about $4.80 at the time. It's jumped longer than Alkaline, so I've actually marked this other horse shorter. I've backed Alkaline at $4.50 and not the other horse at $7.
Right.
Because I felt an obligation. I was quite passionate that I liked Alkaline. I was very big on it, and obviously the other horse won, which made it, which amplified it and magnified it to me. But yeah, exactly right. But that's something I looked at that straight away, and I saw that's just give myself a little bit of spray.
Yeah.
Went and found a mirror, had a look, had a deep gaze into it, and but that's just something I need to improve on as well. It's, but I do love I think I've always had that sort of that team mentality. Like, if I'm tipping it, I've got to be on too, and that's probably not the way. Like, because I'm still tipping it because of the price. That's the whole point of it. So every horse has a probability of winning the race. So it's such a fine balance between tipping things and prices, especially if you're framing your own markets, and you might tip something and it starts $4 and you don't end up backing it at all, and then you're backing something else, and it's such a fine balance between tipping and betting. But in WA as well, Betfair is wild what can happen. Like, we're tipping on, they're almost fake markets that we're tipping on Thursdays and Fridays. Like, I don't know how big it is over east, but the swings are just crazy. Like that I noticed that as well. I don't bet into WA racing much, but I noticed things drifting. Like, you just mentioned a horse that drifted fours out of 22s. That's probably every race. Like, there's that doesn't happen much. Yeah, that's the thing. So they're so wild, the markets, and what they do and how they change. And we had a race yesterday at Belmont. The two favourites were out the door because there was two strong money horses in the race, and it goes from a non-bet race to a max bet race very quickly. And I think that's probably something I have worked on as well, is going, well, hang on, if these were the early prices, and this is the way I like to look at it, if these were the early prices, you would have made phone calls to try and get on. And now you can just go on your Betfair and sort it out. And then you have to justify to yourself, why is this horse drifting? Is this a yard drift? Is there something wrong with the horse in the yard or whatnot? Usually the reason they drift is because there's fake money for another horse in the pool. Like in WA recently, and I think it's data orientated, there's racing up in Carnarvon and Broome on the dirt. Whenever those horses come to town, they should be 100 to 1. But they're coming to town and they're setting big figures on the dirt and they're getting smashed in betting. So they're sort of like 20s into 5s. They're taking up 20% of the pool, and suddenly you're getting bet prices for the rest of them. And you're talking about your edge being non-data. So you're taking on and you're trusting what you do, and that must be a challenge in itself. But you must be confident in your methodology now, especially if you've got the runs on the board. You're confident and you know when horses are drifting or stables, because you're betting into a small pool. You follow the trends, and you're confident that you're not actually using a lot of the market intelligence a lot of the time. You're taking it on and betting to your confidence. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I'm definitely not a follow the money type of person. There's maybe 1 or 2 yards, certain situations, no trials first up. But yeah, I'm back the drift every day of the week. And then I think it gets magnified, especially on social media. If a horse drifts out the door and then fails, they go, oh, they knew. Yeah. But what about the 5 on the card that sort of 3s to 7s and win? We don't say, oh, they didn't know that time, did they? So I think people just look at the times they drift and run horribly rather than, hang on that same card there was 2 others that drifted wildly and won well. So the market doesn't know.
This, I'm going to bring up a table here. This is something you gave us, which is a fascinating insight to your wagering. And I think one of your friends did this that follows your stuff. Now, this talks about your edge, and you talk about recording results and whatnot. This is a huge part of it. Now, this surprised you, this table. You're talking about things under $2.50 you're losing on.
14% of your money.
Whereas the $20 plus, you're making good money. How does that kind of information shape your wagering?
Well, this is very new. I sent this to you probably only 2 weeks after I got it myself. So this is the last 3 years where a good friend of mine, Jared, has done the numbers. And I had a feeling that the shorties, it's never been my strength, hopping into anything too thin, but I did have a feeling that I wouldn't have been showing a huge profit, maybe a small loss. I didn't expect it to be those type of numbers, because you can look at that graph and everything else looks really good and really healthy, but the problem is the amount of money you have to spend backing the shorties. There'd be so much of my outlay in that losing column. So I'm just starting to implement it now. It's funny, you mark one $1.80, it goes around 2.10. It's just a natural, I have a bet. But I think what I perhaps haven't been doing is allowing for natural racing bad luck, or natural racing, a horse isn't right that day, or the horse does get that bit of bad luck, or for whatever reason. That's just that 10% of the time your horse can't win before the race. You don't know it, they just can't win before the race. So you add that 10% to the price and suddenly they don't become a bet, or you need a bigger price to have a bet. But that was kind of confronting. Even you can see the $2.50 to $3 range, we're only going at a tiny profit there as well. And there's a lot of 3 years of data is a lot of betting to give you those type of numbers. So it's true data as well. So it's fascinating. It really should mean that it should be I should see an upward trend in the ROI.
I can't wait to hear all about it and maybe chat in 6 months or a year and see how this kind of data has affected your wagering. Just finally, the life of a professional punter and bankroll management and staking and building a bank and how it's a fascinating challenge. Do you pay yourself wages? Do you take money out of your profits? Do you have a betting bank separate to your bank? How does that all work?
It's a little conversation over the partner occasionally, actually. I just work. I don't have kids. I've just got a partner. So I don't really think about it too deeply. I think that would change if I had someone I had to look after besides a lovely little dog. But I just work on my bank, and I bet basically a max stake of 1%. People bet to win portions of their bank or whatnot. I just bet maximum 1% of my bank at any time. But no, I don't pay myself a wage. I keep things pretty simple in that sense. Do you take money out of
the profits regularly when you need it, or just the betting bank is the betting bank and that's it?
The betting bank's the life bank, to be honest with you. It's a very simplistic way of going about it, but it works for me. I've never seen any huge need to differentiate between the two, so it's all just sort of lumped into one. But that will change in time, I'd suggest.
Terry, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for hours upon hours, days, I reckon, about the great game. I can't wait to hear more. Hopefully we talk about this in 6 months' time to 12 months and find out how it's all going. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tommy.
Any piece of advice to people out there that we'll just leave on?
Find your edge. Don't try and copy somebody else, or don't try and think you have to utilize somebody else's skill set. Whatever your strength is and whatever you think you can see better than somebody else, utilize it and make it work for you.
Great advice. Clarity is important. Thank you for joining me, Terry. That is the end of the education series. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully we can do it all again, but thank you for Layback with Betfair.
Bet with care. Gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-858-858.